Okay, I'm going to coach you just a little bit. You're doing great, but I know sometimes when you're not used to it, it's like, what order do the words go in? So I'm going to say Christ is risen, and you will say he is risen indeed, and then don't forget the alleluia, okay? All right. Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. Hallelujah. And peace. Peace be with you. That's a tough one to know what to do with, isn't it? But I offer you that greeting of peace for two reasons. The first one is that in just a couple weeks, we will read from the Gospel of John that appearance of Jesus to 10 of his disciples when he will speak over them peace. It's easy to overdo Easter morning. And so the second reason I say peace be with you is to offer you a chance to relax, to offer you the chance to take a deep breath, to offer you the opportunity to let go of your expectations of how this morning needs to be perfect or just so, and instead to let it be a morning that's part of your real life. And I lied. There are three reasons I said peace be with you. And that's because through the season of Easter, that's going to be our theme. As we experience the presence of the risen Lord and we receive into our own selves his peace, and we seek to live into his peace. There's a temptation for preachers, I think, to overdo Easter morning. I'll never forget, and I always recall it with great embarrassment, when I was tasked with preaching Easter morning as our staff at a church that I formerly worked at resigned one by one, and I was left to preach on Easter. And I was so intimidated that I thought I knew how to time the service well enough that I could stay in my office to keep getting ready. And then the time came for me to preach, and I was nowhere near the sanctuary. Horrifying memories that always return to me the night before Easter as I try to fall asleep. I don't want to overdo Easter this year. You may have noticed that the gospel passage that was read this morning is rather spare. There are not a lot of details. In fact, Jesus doesn't even make an appearance. He's absent from the passage that we read. Not because he's gone, but because he's risen. The Japanese Catholic author, novelist, Shusaku Endo, talks about this morning in the life of Jesus. He talks about the resurrection. He goes through some of the motions of talking about why the resurrection is believable, and he includes things like the crucifixion is a pretty embarrassing way to depict the master of a religion. Humiliating, shameful death. If you're going to have someone be the master of a religion, you would not want them to be shamed in this way. He also talks about the first leaders of the religion, the apostles. And you'll notice that they are not depicted in this passage in a particularly flattering light. They deserted Christ in his hour of need. They denied knowing him on Good Friday. They're cowards. And in their brief appearance in this passage, they do not believe the good news about him. When speaking about the validity of the resurrection and why we might believe these kinds of passages, Endo goes on to talk about the uniqueness of the resurrection. That other appearances and other religions of the divine among people are not this kind of incarnation, and their appearances, therefore, after seemingly dying, are not this kind of resurrection. One of the details that you'll notice from Luke's gospel this morning is that the linen cloths are left in the tomb, all by themselves. If you were going to steal a body away from a tomb in the middle of the night, you would not take the time to unwrap it. Also missing from the New Testament in many places, especially the Gospels, are explanations for why or how the resurrection takes place. I guess in the letters there is a lot of why, but in the Gospels, there is no why, just the bare fact that it happens. Right? Even when Jesus tells his disciples about what's coming, he doesn't say why the resurrection is going to happen. He just says that it is going to happen. It's an enigma. And so this morning, too many words will fail us. I will seek to use only a few. There are three great mysteries of the Christian faith. There's the incarnation, there's the Trinity, and there's the resurrection. When we say that these are a mystery, what we don't mean is that these can't be talked about in any kind of intelligible way. We don't mean that we can't contemplate them. We don't mean that we can't elaborate doctrine from them. What we do mean is that there's no way we would have guessed that this is the kind of God that we have if God had not shown us these things. There's no way that we would know that God takes on human flesh in a way where God's divinity is completely united to our humanity if it were not revealed to us. There's no way that we would know that our God eternally exists as three co-equal persons if God had not revealed that to us, especially through the mystery of his incarnation. And there's no way that we would know that God was raised from the dead if God did not reveal it to us. Those three great mysteries help us to think about what has taken place over the last 3 days. On Maundy Thursday, our incarnate God knelt down and loved his disciples by serving them from the lowest position in the household. And then he didn't tell them that all you need is love, but he told them that this is how I want you to love one another, and that the world will know that you belong to me when you love one another in this way. It helps us to understand what takes place on Good Friday. The incredible and unthinkable statement, truth, that God died, that God experienced death, that God took death into God's own self. It helps us to understand what takes place on Quiet Saturday, when God is resting on the Sabbath, so to speak, in the grave, and yet not wholly refraining from work. Julian of Norwich says this about Jesus and what takes place across these 3 days. She says, "For Jesus is all who shall be saved, and all who shall be saved are Jesus. For he went into hell, and when he was there, he raised up out of the deep deepness the great root of those who were truly knit to him in high heaven." On Holy Saturday, Jesus' body rests in the grave, but he is busy harrowing hell. This is why we sing gallows on Easter Sunday, because Satan has prepared death for us. And yet Jesus, submitting himself to that exact kind of death, undoes death. And our accuser suffers the fate that he prepared for us. The icon of the resurrection depicts what happens. You see Jesus in glory, surrounded by heaven, invading, breaking down the gates of hell, conquering those instruments of death, and grabbing by the wrist the oldest of our ancestors, Adam and Eve, and taking them out of the place of death, raising them up to heaven. On Easter Sunday, Jesus is raised, and he takes with him all of those who belong to him. So what do we make of death in light of this great life? I know all too well from this last year that we cannot deny its reality. But the church father Athanasius tells us that now, in light of Christ's resurrection, we no longer die as those condemned, but as those who will arise. St. Paul puts it best in 1 Corinthians 15 when he says, "Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting?" Death is that final enemy to be defeated, but what we learn in the life of Jesus is that Jesus seeks to transform his enemies into friends. And so even death becomes a friend. A time in which our bodies are given rest as we prepare to be raised into that new world of which Christ in his resurrection is the first fruits. We see what God intends for everything when we see Jesus raised from the dead. What do we do now? My brothers and sisters, what do we do now when we live in a time of such global upheaval, a time that we have largely, a time that's filled with horrors that since the end of World War II, we largely have been shielded from, have we not? It's not that these horrors haven't existed, it's that our lives have not been confronted with them in the way that they are confronted with them now. What do we do now? I know that this is the question on the top of everyone's minds, or at least most people's minds, because I sit with you in small group, I listen to your prayer requests, I talk with you on Sundays and Mondays, I read your emails and your text messages, and I know that you are confounded. How can we have faith in a time like this? I'm reminded of the words of the missionary Bishop Leslie Newbigin, who after retiring from his bishopric in the Church of South India returned to the United Kingdom. He was asked in an interview near the end of his life how he felt about his work. He was probably the 20th century's greatest ecumenist, meaning he was trying to bring churches and people from varying faith traditions together to be united around the death and resurrection of Jesus. And he's asked towards the end of his life, how did he feel about his ministry? Especially as the great hope of ecumenism, unity among the churches, started to fray at the end of the 20th century in the late 1990s. Did he feel optimistic about the work that he had done and what it might accomplish? And he responded with what has become for me almost a prayer. I am neither an optimist nor a pessimist. Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. Everything is different now, and that's the reality that Peter experiences in Acts chapter 10. The Gentiles heard the good news. The Holy Spirit fell on them in the exact same way that it had fallen on Jewish believers. And now these Gentiles desire to be baptized. So Peter says, what can I do? God has shown us that there is no partiality among peoples. He has preached the good news of peace through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. And in his death and resurrection, God has chosen us as witnesses of this peace. And so we will baptize you in his name. Everything is different now. We live with these mysteries that we could not have thought up on our own if they had not been revealed to us. The sacraments of baptism and Holy Communion continue to hold these mysteries out to us, saying, believe them. Believe the mysteries. Believe that God has taken on human flesh. Believe that in submitting himself to death, God has swallowed up death. Believe that he is risen from the dead and shows us how he will change everything. In Colossians chapter 3, Paul writes to the church that you have been raised with Christ in the same resurrection life. What has happened fully to him has begun in you. And so seek the things that are above, not apart from this world, not leaving this world behind, those things which are from another place and are coming to us here, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. We saw in the lives of Simon and Samson this morning those beautiful truths coming to life. And so whether it's on a global scale that you are fearful, or whether it's in your personal life that you are weary, let us listen to the words of the poet priest Gerald Manley Hopkins. To let Christ Easter in us, to let him be a dayspring to the dimness of us, to be a crimson-crested east. Brothers and sisters, the world has always been this horrible, and human life has always been this hard. And yet, in every generation, Christ comes to us, risen from the dead, holding all life in himself, and whispering to us this truth: my peace is with you. That in a world of impatience and violence, we are capable of being patient and peaceable. That in lives that are filled with the trouble of this world, we are capable of having his peace within us as we contend with death and sin. And so now, on this Easter morning, I ask you to make yourself ready to come to this table by receiving the words of the risen Lord. Peace be with you. Peace be with us. I invite you to take a few moments to quiet yourself in this peace, to rest in it, to claim it as your own because Christ has given it to you as we prepare to come to the Lord's table this morning.